All right, good afternoon, everyone. Let's go ahead and get started. Welcome to the Co-op Collaboration Series. My name is Jeff Rack. I'm Professor of Chemistry at the Department of Chemistry and Chemical Biology, and I'm also the faculty coordinator for the interdisciplinary co-op, science cooperative. So welcome to the building. Building was constructed to help bring people together, and this is one of the events that we do to help bring people together. So the Co-op Collaboration Series is made possible through a generous gift by UNM alumni Larry and Kathy Hancock. And Larry is in fact in Oklahoma and he's watching via Zoom. So one of the great technologies that was allowed during this time in the last 2 years. Their passion for collaboration and team development inspired this new quarterly event dedicated to sharing best practices in team research. We are grateful to them for this gift and we look forward to inviting you back to future events. So now I'd like to introduce Vice President for Research, Ellen Fisher. Dr. Fisher is a chemist and material scientist who's published over 160 peer-reviewed articles in such diverse topics as plasma science, laser spectroscopy, which is my personal favorite, materials chemistry, chemistry education, responsible conduct in research, and team science, excuse me. She's a fellow of the American Association for the Advancement of Science, the American Chemical Society, and the American Vacuum Society. Ellen has graciously offered to be our guest speaker today in order to give a broader foundation on how to think about increasing engagement within our teams and how to realize better research outcomes through building new team efforts. Ellen, please.
Thank you. All right, so I'm gonna do this. I'm gonna require some interaction on the part of the audience. I will just tell you that. And I told other groups this. I used to teach general chemistry, 250-seat lecture hall, and I'm real good at waiting for responses. So if I ask for a response on something, okay, I can wait a long time. So think about how you're gonna put in. Yeah. I do not have a microphone.
People on Zoom there, I don't think they can hear them.
My friends in the room, yes. Yeah. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, sure.
Okay. So when I got asked to do this, we were talking about engagement, and so empowerment through engagement. We could also say engagement through empowerment. I mean, these things are sort of, people think maybe there's a little interchangeability here, but I also added here, and could we possibly even get back to thriving? So to start this, because I think that this is one of the things, okay, I'm going down. Or did you go off my slides?
Did right now.
Yep. One of the things that the pandemic has taught us, which I'll get to my next, I know it's on my next slide, but the thing I wanted to say about the pandemic is that one of the biggest things that people keep reporting on is the lack of engagement. And it's really interesting to think about what does that actually mean, right? And what does engagement actually mean? So I've got definitions, yes. So if we start with empower, what does it mean to empower people, right? Or to empower someone? It's to give someone the authority or power to do something, of course, or make someone stronger and more confident, especially in controlling their life and claiming their rights, okay? So hang on to that. If we go think about empowering, then through engagement, you're doing it through occupy, attract, or involve someone's interest or attention, participate or become involved in, or arrange to employ or hire someone. So that last one is probably not really what we're talking about. It's the other two. So empowering through engagement, think about that. And then we think about what does it mean to thrive? It means to grow or develop well or vigorously, to prosper or flourish. Okay. So I always like to start with definitions because then we can start to think about that in a framework of saying, okay, what does it mean to empower? What does it mean to empower through engagement? What does it mean to empower through engagement to the point that we're actually thriving? Okay. So I want to focus on the how. And the Google study is one that I talk about a lot when I talk about team science, when I do team science training and so forth. I'm not going to go into it a whole lot of detail, but the take home message from it, Google studied 180 teams in-house, and they were trying to find what makes for the best team, right? And what they found was that the who was not important as much as the how was, okay? So the thing that they really broke it down to is that there were critical group norms on all of their successful teams Successful being defined as meeting or exceeding their stated goals for annual progress, okay? They came out of these 5 things: psychological safety, dependability, roles and structure, meaning and impact, okay? It was really about how the groups were working, how they had set up structures, and so forth. So I'm going to talk a little bit more about these, and I'm going to make an argument right here that a lot of what I'm going to talk about in the how comes down to psychological safety. If you can create psychological safety on your team, then all of this other stuff sort of follows. But alternatively, you can say, if you have all this other stuff, then you'll end up with psychological safety. So I think these things are intertwined, but they're really important to be keeping in mind here. Okay, so then the other thing I wanted to talk a little bit about, so that was sort of Google and team science and all that. But recently there was a study that was put out that Microsoft did, an in-house study. They've been studying themselves for a while, but they really wanted to get beyond employee engagement. They wanted to stop talking about engagement and really think about, our employees may be engaged, but are they thriving? And especially post-pandemic or post maybe, or pre-post pandemic, or I don't know where we are in the pandemic. So, so a couple of things from that study. They define thriving as to be energized and empowered to do meaningful work. So again, remember, Google said meaning and impact are really important. I talked about empowerment, engagement, right? And energy I hadn't put up there yet. But what they found was that their thriving employees reported things like that. They said they had worked in a collaborative environment with a lot of teamwork. There was an inclusive culture with autonomy and flexibility. They felt like there was support for their well-being. And they also felt like they were able to have honest, non-judgmental conversations on difficult topics with focus on finding solutions. That's psychological safety right there, okay? On the other hand, they're non-thriving, employees that reported that were non-thriving based on the way they did their study, which we can talk about. They reported that they were experiencing silos, tons of bureaucracy, being left out of decision-making, and a lack of collaboration, okay? Sounds like not a lot of psychological safety for those employees. So I also want to make a note on top of that with respect to thriving versus work-life balance. And this is again from the Microsoft studies. So the employees that reported both thriving and higher work-life balance relative to employees that were still thriving, but reported having a lower work-life balance. So the ones that had a higher work-life balance or higher satisfaction with their work-life balance also had 5 fewer hours in their work week span, 5 fewer collaboration hours, 3 more focus hours, and 17 fewer employees in internal network size, okay? So, and by the way, I think this is a little creepy because Microsoft did this by mining the data from their email, okay? So it's a little creepy, but does this mean collaboration is bad? So I'm going to pose that question right now. Is collaboration bad? What do those numbers say to you guys? I got a lot of shaking heads. Yeah.
It sounds like it's bad the way it's framed, but not necessarily. It just means these people really are spending 13 less hours tied to their desk or tied to their work.
Okay. All right. That's a really good interpretation. Yeah, Victor.
Why is collaboration best? Why?
Yeah. Why is it best? Well. Why is collaboration? Ah, yes. Why is collaboration? Which is a perfect segue to my next slide, which is this one, which is a very interesting piece of data that was reported. This is back in 2016, so way pre-pandemic, if you think about it. And I want to walk through the slide just a little bit. The data show on the x-axis is the share of colleagues wanting greater access to a person, okay? Each of the bubbles in the plot represent a person. So they were asked, who do you want to have greater access to? Like you really want to have this person, you want them on your team, so forth, okay? So that's the x-axis. The y-axis is that's the share of the colleagues believing that that individual is an effective information source, okay? And so what this shows is that the size of the bubble, if it's smaller, means that that person reported having less job satisfaction, okay? So if you look up in, let's see if I can make I can't. If you look up here where you have a lot of people wanting access to you and you're also the person that everybody wants information from, because you're a great source of information, you have less job satisfaction. Okay. Again, does this mean collaboration is bad? I think we're back to the answer back there. If you're wisely collaborating and you're thinking about when you say yes and when you say no, then you're in a better space. Okay. But it's something to keep in mind as we talk about what are best practices for having effective teams that can empower through engagement. Okay. So I say all that. I'm going to come to I decided this is going to be a fun presentation. So I decided to do the top 7 hits in practical tips to engage and empower your team. Okay. And I'm going to go through each one of these separately. I thought I'd put them all up here. And I want to really focus. I should have done this David Letterman style and, did them from, 7 to number 1. Okay. But I couldn't get PowerPoint to figure out how to renumber something, and I didn't put them in right. Oh, well, anyway. Okay. But a couple things that I want to focus on here is the last one we're going to talk about a lot is having fun. Okay. And I've got some more data to show that is probably really critical to everything that we do. So when I have fun, I brought toys with me today also. So team, number 1, create team norms and values. Okay. So it depends on what you want to call these. Some people call them norms, some of them call them values, some of them call them ground rules, some of people call them, group policies, group, whatever you want to call it. Okay. There's lots of different names, right? So today, what favorite team norms you want to practice? I've given you some hints. This is from an exercise we did. This is a team I worked with. And these were their sticky notes that they put up in a Jamboard. We don't have a Jamboard today. So you guys can pick one of those or just shout out your favorite ones. Be present. Love that. What else? Respect others. Love that. You could close your eyes, not look at these. You don't find one you like, make up one of your own. Okay, use of the parking lot. I'm going to talk about that. Yeah, we're going to use parking lots. That's awesome.
All voices are respected.
All voices are respected. Okay.
Assume positive intentions.
Assume positive intentions. I love that. I used to hear that a lot from a person that I worked with that never had good intentions for anything. So I really wondered about that. It was like cognitive dissonance around now, but I was like, okay. Okay. So I'm going to talk a minute about this. Anybody want to throw this out there? I will point out that the no assholes rule, anybody heard of the book, the no assholes rule? It's a good book. Great book. It's about not hiring assholes. Okay. I'm all for it. 100% not for it. Do not want any more assholes in my life. Okay. See, you guys thought you were just going to come to some boring presentation. You heard the VPR talk about assholes. Okay. So think about how you might bring this back to your team. And I will say that I recently had a conversation about doing this very thing, creating group norms. And one of the people I was talking with said, oh God, and I'm exaggerating and I'm not, but it just feels so touchy-feely. What do I do? I don't want to make it touchy-feely. I said, okay, let's start small. Let's do it in the context of a meeting, okay? And you're meeting with your colleagues. Let's set some ground rules for that meeting. The ground rules could be as simple as, we're going to start on time. We're going to end on time. We're going to respect everybody's time. And that's enough. Maybe you come up with 1 or 2 or whatever. It's a way to start to set expectations about how you're going to interact with the people that you work with. Okay. And if you're talking about being on a team, it's a really important thing to talk about. How are we going to interact with each other? Okay. And in my group, when I had a research group, I developed group policies. Because very early on as an assistant professor, I ran into a couple of issues with some students who were not behaving in the way that I wanted them to be behaving. And I was really struggling with how do I have this conversation with these students who are great students, but they really need to be doing things a little bit differently. And I came up with a thing called group policy. We called it group policies. Okay. And it was a living document. We reviewed it every year. We had a group meeting specifically around group policies. We would review them and we changed them. And so they changed over 25 years that I had the group policies in place. This document changed, it was a living document, and it changed because it depended on who was in the group and what we were doing. And it was agreed to. I did have, veto power on, people wanted to put things in that I didn't like, but everybody got engaged with it. And anytime there was an issue, interpersonal issue or whatever, it was a tool that we all could use to say, you remember how we all agreed that we were going to follow these policies and do these things? You're not doing that. And so you're letting the whole team down. And it made those critical, difficult, but important conversations really easy to have because we talked about it on a regular basis. Sometimes we revisited the policies more than annually, just because we sometimes had to do that. Another thing I'm going to really point out that is so important is make the implicit explicit. Don't make assumptions. And that's the other thing that doing this can really empower people, because a lot of times, especially if you're working across disciplines, across cultures, people don't always understand this. The same things are not going on. It's like, oh yeah, I thought we all did that, right? And that causes a lot more conflict than you might imagine. So simply writing these things down and to say what they are out loud. I worked with a team a couple of years ago, and we did this exercise, and literally the PI on this huge project said, oh, I get it now. And I was like, yeah, it's really important to just write it down and make sure everybody understands it, which is why I'll also point out when you do this, you might want to go a little bit deeper than just saying something like, you're going to respect everybody. Okay. And say, take it to the next level and say, we're going to demonstrate that respect by doing what? By starting the meetings on time, by ending on time, whatever it is, right? But to dig a little bit deeper so that people aren't stuck with, because what I think is respect might not be what Mindy thinks is respect, okay? And so keep that in mind. It does take time. Norms are dynamic, as I said with my group policies, revisit them, okay? But they are empowering. You engage everyone. This is a really empowering tool that can help you to set expectations. And I'll also say that you can build into these things conflict norms. What are we going to do when we have a disagreement? How are we going to behave when we disagree? And again, when you do that and you write it down and somebody gets into a conflict, I don't care if it's between two students, between a student and a faculty member, I don't care who it's between. If you have conflict norms where you can say, hey, we're in a conflict, we're going to walk away now. Remember, we said we give each other time to come back, and we'll come back to this later or whatever, right? Okay. And again, if a team member is not following through, you can emphasize whatever your team norms or values are. If dependability, roles, and structure are part of it, you can start to do that through your team values or team norms. Okay, number 2, utilize plans and agendas. Oh, academia, we hate agendas. I don't know how many faculty meetings I've been in, there's not an agenda, or there's an agenda that is like one item. And then we end up spending, an hour and a half on something that could have taken 10 minutes, or maybe we didn't even have to meet about it at all. I don't know. Okay, so this is, I have several steps here. Encourage everyone to make a plan, or maybe 3 individual development plans have become really important for our students and other trainees, postdocs, and so forth. I would argue that every faculty member should also have developed an individual development plan. And I would say that I, even as a VPR, should have an individual development plan. I've got one up here. I haven't actually written it down. But also, let's make some experimental plans. What experiments are you going to do, and when are you going to do them? How does that coordinate with the other people in your lab? Okay. Let's create a writing plan. We have these five articles that we need to get published. What's the plan for getting them published? Who's going to take the lead on each one? And what are the timelines going to be for getting those done? It's the best way to make sure that you stay on task, even if you miss the deadlines. Okay. I used to do this again with the with the group policy, the annual meeting. We talk about group policies, and then we talk about group goals, and we set the group goals for the year. It's always so fun. But we talk about what the goals were for the last year, which ones we'd met, which ones we hadn't met, and why we hadn't met them. Because sometimes there were goals that we didn't know about in January that we ended up doing. And so being able to revisit that was a really important way for the group to see that things change and research is dynamic, right? In addition, we would write out this incredibly ambitious plan for articles that we were going to submit. So I had this great table where it was like, okay, here's the nominal title for the article. Here's who the responsible writers are. Here's what journal we're gonna aim for. Here's the estimated time of submission, ETS. And then through the year, I would, as we submitted them, I would put in the ATS, the actual time of submission. Okay. They never, very rarely lined up unless we had one in January that we knew was going to go out the door. And I was able to, oh, look, we said that was going to go on January 15th, and it's January 15th. But really, really important to have both short and long-term goals. Helps to keep people empowered, okay? But it isn't just about making the goals, it's about revisiting them, and it's about talking about why maybe we didn't meet those goals because something else new and interesting and exciting came up and we did that. And in one instance, I was able to use it as a tool with one of my students who was having time management problems, okay? And so then we talked about, okay, let's talk about why didn't you do the things you said you were gonna do? And let's talk about how you can, enlist some strategies to help on that. Create time to share with entire team. So again, revisit these periodically, discussing obstacles and changes. Celebrate milestone achievements, okay? You get a paper submitted, you should celebrate. You get one accepted, there should be champagne, okay? I don't have a picture of a champagne bottle in here, but Katie knows that I like sparkling wine. And in my household, my husband has a saying that says, if you don't drink champagne when good things happen to you, they might not ever happen to you again. Some days I go home and open a bottle of champagne because I made it through the day. And that was a really good thing. So celebrate. Develop agendas for meetings, okay? Be efficient with everyone's time, ensure important issues get discussed, and utilize the parking lot to stay on topic. The parking lot is just a tool for when there's something that comes up that maybe is a really important topic and maybe we really do need to talk about it, but not today, not in this meeting. So you say, okay, we're going to put it in the parking lot. We promise we'll revisit it. And then you put it at the top of the agenda for the next meeting, or you set up a separate meeting to just discuss that, okay? And so it's important to acknowledge that people can bring up really good ideas in a context of a meeting that isn't at all about that idea, okay? And then be able to go back to them. And then provide opportunities for sharing successes, and then assign action items with names next to them. I was just in a meeting earlier this week where somebody said, well, wait, what were we going to do next on that? And the response was, oh yeah, we forgot to put a name next to that action item, so it didn't get done. Okay. And that happens so frequently where you say, yeah, that's a really good idea. Let's do that. And then a month later, you're back meeting and it's like, hey, what were we going to do about that? Oh yeah, let's do that. Okay. And then, so as you go along, action item with a name on it. And as you all are sitting there, you're going, oh, these are such simple things, Ellen. What the hell? I'm like, yeah, these are really simple. This is like what you could have known for your life in kindergarten, that thing. Okay. But sometimes hearing it out loud, these are empowering things. I'm only on tip number 2, so I'm going to try to speed it up just a little bit. Number 3, clarify roles and structures. This is out of the Google study, and the quote that we like to use with this is, our team has an effective decision-making process. Who in here has a team with an effective decision-making process? Anyone? Ooh, Chris does. All right. That's telling right there, you guys. Why we need roles and responsibility. Everybody knows what to do. Everything gets done. There's less wasted energy, and you can align individual strengths with the goals of the team. Okay. If you don't have clear roles and responsibilities, people can end up duplicating effort, which then just pisses everybody off. Okay, because it's like, and again, I can tell a story about how I was in a situation where I worked with someone who would tell me to go do something and then would tell 3 other people to go do the same thing. And then at some point down the road, we will all discover that we were all doing the same thing. And then guess what? All of us were pissed off about it because, if we knew the other person had been doing it, then we wouldn't have been doing it. Okay. Or we could have coordinated efforts, right? So having roles and structures is really important. And I always like to point out that you don't ask your air conditioner to heat your home in the wintertime, right? So when you can align strengths, if you know what your team's strengths are, what individual strengths are, you can set those up to align with the roles and responsibilities and tasks that need to get done. Okay. The other thing to keep in mind with this though, is that roles can change. And if you think about the progression of a student, if you think about undergraduates or graduate students, they start out, they don't really know what they're doing, and they might have a very limited role, might have very limited assigned tasks to them, responsibilities. But as they start to grow and develop, you want to make sure that you're continuing to give them additional roles and so forth. And then the other thing that I like to say for faculty in particular, that we spend a lot of our time and effort doing things that maybe we shouldn't be doing. And again, you can schedule meetings and reserve rooms and create an agenda, but should you be the person doing that? Sometimes you're the only person available to do that. And I recognize that, but sometimes you could assign that task to a student. You could assign it to a program manager or whatever, and then you're freeing up your time to be doing something else than doing that. Which is not to say that these tasks are, beneath anybody, but thinking about what's the most effective use of time. But also, could you possibly be empowering somebody by giving them something to do, right? So who's involved? What are the tasks, deliverables, assigned role and task? Okay, I'm gonna say identifying action items, putting a name next to it and a due date. Okay, when are we gonna have this done by? And don't wait till the end of the meeting to assign action items, because people are going to be running out the door. Okay. Now, here's the critical part about this. What if no one wants to do the action item? Okay. No one's volunteering. Maybe it doesn't need to get done. Okay. That's always for me, that's always number one. Maybe we don't need to be doing that. Okay. If nobody wants to do it. But also, there might be somebody who's not in the room that it's the perfect task for them. And so maybe that's time for them. And then also discussing timeline, because maybe it's something that everybody wants to do, but now it's not the right time to do it. So maybe it's something that we put in the parking lot, or just say we're going to do that next year instead of this year or whatever. Okay. Okay. Related, very related is delegating tasks. And I'm going to say, I've had this conversation with a lot of people about delegation. Nobody does it very well. Okay. Nobody does it well. We all want control. We all want to keep this together. I think the number one thing, this is stuff that comes out of rework with Google. And I think that there's some important points here. I think the most important thing to think about is, I don't know if it's on this text, it's on the next one. But the most important here is what tasks can't you delegate and why, and then what is it that you could be delegating that you're not delegating, okay? But then I want to say how delegation empowers, and this is probably the most important, is that it really does create opportunities, meaning that there are mechanisms to grow and develop, whether it's a staff member, a student, a colleague, that there may be ways for them to grow and develop that you're preventing them from doing if you don't delegate tasks, okay? It also builds trust. Now we're back to psychological safety. Okay. If you delegate a task to someone else, you say, hey, this is yours, go do it. Make it so, right? That's a lot of trust. We can talk about how much time you give somebody to do a task and, when you check back in with them and all that, but you also have to delegate authority with tasks. So again, I've worked in organizations where oh yeah, you get to go do all this stuff, but you don't have any decision-making authority, right? Well, then what do I, there's no empowerment in that at all. It does open lines of communication, develops confidence, and allows people to think about being self-managed. Send a student into a lab, give them some direction, but then let them do things on their own, right? It will also increase productivity. Okay, so again, if you want to try to make your team more productive, more effective, achieve your goals, no matter what they are, start to delegate, start to assign tasks and roles and delegate different things to other people. Okay, this is my favorite one. And I'm literally, if I had only one tip to give you, this is probably the one that I would give you, is to practice even turn taking. There's quite a bit of literature that talks about when you have even turn taking, it builds collective intelligence. So if you're on a multidisciplinary team and you want to build collective intelligence, practice even turn taking. So conversations are two-way streets. I like this too. If only one person gets to speak, or if two people speak but one's not listening, that's not a conversation. Okay, neither of those things are conversations. And I think that thinking about this as a complicated dance, that timing and cooperation are key, and also that there are regional, ethnic, and gender differences in how we take on conversation. And so keeping those things in mind when you have even turn taking, you allow for all of the voices to be heard. Okay, so I want to show you some data that we have. If you aren't convinced by me just telling you that this is really important, okay? We had some teams where we actually sat in the room and counted how many times people talked and for how long they talked, okay? We did an intervention with them. So this is pre-intervention. This is before we said anything. We're just sitting in the room and observing, right? There were 22 people in the room, and 7 of them barely spoke. 13 people spoke for 5% of the time over here. And so 13 people spoke less than 5% of the time. There's a couple more people down there. And 2 people had 31% of the turns. Okay. So what do you guys notice about the groups that I had put into squares? Anything that comes to mind when you see that?
They're a discrete population.
Oh, really? Like how?
One's faculty and one's people who are on their way to becoming faculty.
Potentially, but
Or people who quit the work attack.
yes, okay. So they had a room full of students at both the undergraduate and graduate level, and the students weren't speaking. There was a postdoc that didn't speak, the lab manager didn't speak. Okay, so there were lots of people who were not contributing to this, and we had 2 faculty members that literally occupied most of the time. Now, there are times in a meeting where that's what the meeting is about, and some people are there just to listen. But this was a team meeting where we were supposed to be sharing results and doing those kinds of things. So this was a little interesting. So the PI on this project, it was a huge project, involved community partners, said, wow, I really feel like we should be trying to involve students. And I really, had actually noticed that something was going on, but couldn't put their finger on it. So we suggested that they think about even turn taking and some things that they could do, gave us some suggestions for what they could do in the meeting that might help allow there to be more voices being heard in the meeting. So post intervention, and literally it was like one conversation. This was an amazing team. We've published a paper on them. So this is post intervention. So again, 23 people in the room, and you can see already that it's a lot more equal. Now down here, we have 2 postdocs and a faculty member who didn't speak at all. Those were brand new people to the team. Like they literally had not been in anything before. So they were sitting there basically just getting their feet wet and thinking about it. And then you're going to say, well, at the other end, you have a collaborator that's got a really huge amount. This was actually an invited expert who was there to actually give a presentation as part of the meeting. Okay, so you can understand why the data might look the way they do. I really want you to focus on across here. What you see is that we have faculty members that are down at that end of the spectrum, and we have graduate students and postdocs that are up at this end of the spectrum. Okay, so very small intervention, allowed there to be more voices to be heard in the context of a meeting and to get more perspectives on the science that was being done. Okay. Again, there's a lot of literature. I'm not going to talk about this, but I want to point out that there's lots and lots of benefits of even turn taking. It increases satisfaction in meetings. Teams with more functional interactions were more satisfied with their meetings and higher team productivity. Turn taking practices were linked to both cultural norms and trust levels, again, psychological safety. And groups where a few people dominated the conversation were less collectively intelligent than those with a more equal distribution of conversational turn taking. Okay, turn taking. It's really, really important. So I brought with me, I have a couple of things here. I just last week, I was at the National Academies, and I listened to a presentation by someone who said that they had been taught that you never present to an audience without bringing something physical to share. So I want you guys to tell me, as I stand up here with these 2 balls in my hand, how do you practice or implement turn taking? What are some things that you guys could do? Yeah.
I was taught by one of my mentors to start with the tackle one around it. So the discussion.
Excellent.
Everybody's
Yeah, I can throw.
You can repeat what somebody said, but you can't respond to it.
Okay, there we go. That's something. Okay,
And it goes all the way around the room. I know that's all. That means for.
good. Okay. What else? Anything?
Active facilitation.
Active facilitation. What do you mean, Mindy?
So, having someone who's really paying attention to the fact that multiple voices from the entire room rather than this having a mind who.
Okay. Yeah.
So for instance, sometimes when I ask a question for the students, I expect everyone to have an answer. So I will make sure you get an answer from number 1 or number 3 and so on.
Okay. I have some mixed responses to that because it can put people on the spot that maybe don't want to talk or whatever. But I will say, this is one that I use electronically in that same vein, is the Chatterfall, where you ask a question and say nobody can respond until you count it down and then say, okay, hit return. And then in Zoom, that everything comes up and it all comes up at once. Okay, so you can't be influenced by other people's responses, right? So then, and then everybody can have a voice. They don't have to actually verbalize what they're thinking, but you can say like, what's your favorite color? And everybody puts it into the chat, but doesn't hit return. Then you hit return all at once. And then you see all of them come up. So it comes like a waterfall. So I called it the Chatterfall. Chris, this is the one I brought these because this is another way, is you can have a ball that you pass, right? And so it's a physical object that you can pass and then you have to say something. But if you don't have the ball, you don't get to say anything. The talking stick is another way that people say, oh, if you don't have the talking stick, you don't get to talk. Okay.
Love that.
You can keep it. You can keep it, Jack. No, you can keep it. Seriously. And actually, by the way, we had Celebrate Postdoc Week last week. Anybody participate in any of the Postdoc Appreciation Week? Excellent. Julia did. Anybody else? Yeah. I went over to HSC on Monday. We had this benefit, or Wednesday, Monday. Anyway, HSC campus, we had the postdoc resources fair. And so everybody was showing up and had tables. Everybody had swag. Do you know what the number one thing that they all had? It's stress balls. I was like, wow, this campus is so stressed. That's like the number one thing they were giving. Oh, do you want a stress ball? Do you want a square one? Do you want a round one? Do you want a straight up and chili? It was amazing. I really was impressed. So, okay. I am going to move us along here. I'm trying to keep an eye on the time. So like, this is sort of what Mindy said. Here are just some prompts that you can choose. First of all, if you put it into your group values or your team norms or whatever, everyone participates, shares, turns, no one dominates. Any of those things can go in as a group value. And then in a meeting, you get to say things like, remember the team's ground rules or conflict norms, right? Or you can say, let's do some reflecting before anyone speaks, okay? Because that's another thing that happens a lot in classrooms, is that you ask a question of the class and then somebody, really bright, sitting right in the front row says, I know the answer, kind of like when Chris raised his hand that he's got a great functional, whatever it was that I asked about, Chris is perfect. Okay. You could also redirect the conversation in a variety of ways. And again, I've also done things where if I have somebody that team that I showed you, that wasn't the only team that we took that data on. And we have some data for a team where there was a meeting they held where one person dominated, I think it was something like 75 or 80% of the time. So basically just like took up all the air in the room. Didn't even realize they were doing it. I don't think, I'm not sure. But the thing that I've done with people like that, not that particular individual, but others, is to take them aside at some other time, especially if it's a mixed meeting where you have both faculty and students. And there's a difference in the power dynamics, which is my next tip, is and said, we're trying to teach the students. And so, you need to give them some space. And that worked. In one case, I did that and it worked. So that brings me to tip number 6, which is manage the power dynamics. And again, I'm not going to cover all of these, but making responses anonymous is a way to let people have a voice if they don't really want to speak. Hopefully you end up in a case where everybody feels like they have some psychological safety and can say that, but create opportunities for your trainees to speak, involving them in decision-making. And we can talk about that too, creating team norms. And again, that's a way to really think about this. And then as a PI, if you're a PI sitting here, I think one of the things that's really great is normalizing brainstorming. And so you can throw out your own sort of dumb ideas, okay? And then go, okay, and when everybody says that's a really dumb idea, it's like, okay, but let's talk about it, right? And you never know when some dumb idea is going to spark innovation. The other thing that I have mixed feelings about, but speaking last versus speaking first. If you speak first, then especially if you're a PI or you have a higher power dynamic, you're higher on the power scale than other people in the room. I think about this a lot as VPR. If I come into a room and I say, this is what we're going to do, then guess what? Everybody in the room says, okay, that's what we're going to do, right? So if I don't say anything to start with, that allows other people to speak last. Okay, to speak last. The thing I don't want to do, and I do think about this sometimes too, is have everybody in the room talk and then say, yeah, we're not going to do any of that. We're going to do what I want to do. Okay. And so you have to be careful about that one. The other one that I point out about here is don't be be quick to judge either verbally or with body language. And this one I learned from my students also. I learned so much over the years from my students that I would sit and listen to their seminars. And apparently I do not have a good poker face. Okay. And I would sit in seminars and I go, oh God, okay, I'm exaggerating, but apparently they would be like looking at me and then they would just fall apart because it's like, oh my God, she just was, and I would be like, no, I was just squinting to make sure I understood what you were, I don't know. So I started sitting in seminars where I literally would sit like this and not look up until they were well into their presentation. So, and then project management, which we don't have to talk a whole lot about, but okay. So manage the power dynamics. If you really want to have an empowered team, you have to recognize and acknowledge that there are power dynamics, but there are things you can do to level the playing field to a large extent, okay? One thing that I like to talk about is decision-making, if you can involve people in decision-making, and using something like a gradient of agreement. This is one that came out from Kaner in the facilitation literature a number of years ago. Goes all the way from number 1 is wholehearted endorsement down to number 8 is where you're vetoing it, okay? I find this to be kind of, it's long and whatever. It can be used. This is a much better one. Do we love it, like it, live with it? Can I live with it or do I loathe it? Okay, so it's just 4. It's really easy to remember too, because they all start with L's, okay? But the idea is that if you're trying to make a decision and you want to get a feel for the room, if you use a gradient of agreement, you don't have to have 100% agreement with 100% of everything. Most of the time, you just have to be able to live with it. Okay, so keep that in mind. On this scale, you only have to be able to live. You don't have to have everybody love it. You don't have to have everybody even like it. You just have to have everybody be able to live with it. Okay. So that's basically what this says. I do think that you can have lukewarm support versus enthusiastic support, depending on what you're doing. And so thinking about that. And then my last one is having fun. And I do want to spend 1 minute on this and then I will wrap up. But basically, research says that fun has a positive impact on engagement, again, creativity and purpose. 81% of employees at companies ranked as great company describe their environments as fun. Okay, so 81%, that's huge, right? Does improve mindset and builds camaraderie. Happy teams are healthier teams. Some strategies for doing this: gamifying your tasks. And somebody said, I showed the slide to somebody and said, what does that mean? I said, oh my God, so make it a game, play with it, right? Set it up so that it's a challenge or it's a competition. Or if you don't like competitions, just think about how you can break things down and I don't know. Gamify just means to make it fun, okay? Vary your location. I've had a lot of times where I've had people that I do walking meetings with, or we go outside, we just walk, and we have a meeting where we're walking, and that's a lot more fun when you stop and look at what's going on and so forth. Making small changes is good. Creating challenges is also good. Okay. Here's some more ideas about how to have fun, just in case you guys can't come up with any. Again, these are all, again, when you have fun. I had a friend from grad school who used to say, I refuse to do things I don't like for fun. When he first said it to me, I was like, I don't understand what you're saying. And then I got it, because I don't like roller coasters, and people always want to go to amusement parks and go on the roller coaster. And I'm like, yeah, no, not doing, no, it'll be fun. No, it won't. I will throw up all night long after I do that. Okay. So, summary. There's small, I think big thing is there are small things you can do to improve team performance. Having to think about engagement and empowerment. I think they're somewhat interchangeable in this context, but it also can improve teaming, increase productivity, and build overall satisfaction. And I think that is my last slide. So. Oh, I did not mention it here, but this is another one of my favorite tools, the magic wand. So. Yes. Any questions, any follow-up, any ideas? Yeah.
Very helpful. Do you think about feminist leadership principles at all? Or is there a feminist perspective on this?
I'm sure there is. I'm not very familiar with the literature with respect to how that feeds into this. I will tell you that of the teams that I've worked with, most of the women walk in the room going, oh, this is great because I can use it because it's structures, and then it makes it easier and it takes it off of me and it puts it onto the process and the team and the whatever, right? Most of the men walking back, I don't need this. And they walk out going, oh my God, that was so empowering because I can do blah, 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 right? Okay, so I think it's more about the mindset about whether or not you think that you have some inherent power that you can then give to other people, right? And a lot of times I think women walk around thinking that they don't have power, or thinking that if they give it up, that there's something that it makes them, it lessens their ability to lead. And I'm not sure I'm convinced of that. Whereas I think that, and I'm doing broad generalizations here, okay? And I just acknowledge, I don't know the literature, there's probably great literature out there, but in my experience, that's kind of what I've seen with women, and whereas men feel like they already have that power, and so they take this kind of information and they actually, if they embrace it, can use it in a way that still allows them to retain their sort of positional power, but also gives them relational power as well. So I'm not sure I'm answering your question, but I do think there are differences in how this works. Mindy, help me out.
I can help, I have another question.
Oh, okay, go ahead. Another question. Great. Okay.
I'm curious what your thoughts are on meeting in person versus meeting on Zoom, because I think a lot of us have ended up launching interdisciplinary teams during the pandemic, and there's been, I have my own thoughts about how that's changed the kind of the team culture a little bit, but I'm interested in your thoughts on that.
Yeah.
I think whether it's better to meet, to meet in person or on Zoom, or kind of get into, there's always, I think, something of a preference of doing Zoom, even when we can't all be in the city, just want to be in, we don't be back, we don't walk somewhere on campus.
Oh my God, God forbid we don't walk on that campus, right? Yeah, I do have some thoughts on it. It's interesting because I worked with a team over the pandemic that got a BII planning grant. So it's for the big NSF biology initiative. And they did everything virtually. And we did some analysis of their interactions, and they worked very, very hard at making sure that the people were interacting, and that there was opportunities for people to get to know each other and do some of the stuff that we would do naturally in person. And they definitely were able to make some more connections with that. So I don't want to say that virtual is bad and in person is good at all, because I think that there are ways that you can do this. I think in both cases you have to be intentional, but I think it's a lot easier when you're in person to have the kind of, I call it like, we've been talking a lot about mentoring, and I call it the hallway mentoring, right? So you're just walking down the hall and the colleague's door is open, you stick your head in and say, how you doing? Or they, or a junior colleague can come in and say, hey, I need advice on this one question. Can you give me some advice, right? That's the kind of stuff that does not happen virtually. And in the context of a team trying to get some research done, regardless of the area, you don't have those other conversations where it's like, I got this little piece of data and I don't really know what it means. Do you have any ideas? Can we maybe brainstorm what that is in the moment, right? Because we have to set it up, we have to get a Zoom, we have to make sure that Zoom is updated, and then we have to, right, all that stuff, right, in order to do it virtually, right? So I think it's harder to do virtually, and I think that you lose out on some of those impromptu brainstorming and in the moment kinds of interactions that often can lead to innovation and discovery, and you cannot have that virtually, right? I don't think that means that you can't have a virtual team. I think you just have to be a lot more intentional about how you create opportunities for having that kind of interaction come out in the context of a Zoom meeting. So, yeah.
So, a week or two ago, and it was probably in Inside Higher Ed, there was an article about a group that had developed these sort of very overt hand and signals for virtual meetings, and I forget what they measured, but they measured better satisfaction with their meeting. Some of them were really big, right?
Yeah.
So,
Yeah. So one of the things that was the other thing I was going to add. I think one of the things that is positive about virtual, and I've heard a bunch of people talk about this as well, is that when everybody went virtual, that there were values and group norms that were developed to talk about how we're going to interact over Zoom. And these were within groups that had never talked about those things when they were meeting in person, right? And so there is overall better satisfaction because the meetings are run more smoothly, they're more coherent. It's very hard to have somebody interrupt and talk over because there's always somebody else who has the ability to mute participants, right? Oh, I'm sorry, I hit that button, I didn't mean to do that, and then you're shut up and your turn is over, right? So if you're doing much more even turn taking in Zoom meetings. So other thoughts, yeah.
So many teams in academia, I mean, there's research teams, I think, where we have a little bit more control to do these things at the beginning, but other teams in academia are more, it's dynamic where you're coming into these different groups.
Yeah.
And I'm curious of ideas for if there happened to be a member of that group who's very disengaged and just suddenly engage with setting the group norms and doesn't engage with any of the processes of the group, like any ideas you have for.
Yeah, so, okay, I'm gonna start one step before that. So again, teams are dynamic, people come on and off, and especially in academia, right? We have students that come in and leave, we have students that just flake out, whatever, right? Hopefully they graduate, but, and one of the, again, sort of best practices in this world is to make sure that you have really good onboarding, processes and exit strategies, okay? Well, I like to call them graceful exits, that there are ways that you can leave, right? And so part of what you're talking about is if that's in place, right? Like if you have good onboarding strategies, if you have good exit strategies, that's part of that issue, right? But if you have somebody who's truly not engaging, I think the first thing that I would do is sit them down and say, do you even want to be part of this group? Right? Whatever the group is, and maybe there's no way to kick them out of the group. Okay. But to sort of talk about what are we not doing, and put it back on them in some ways of saying, we really want you to be part of this and we want your contributions. What are we not doing to get those? What could we be doing better to get those? And that having that conversation, depending on the context, can be really illuminating, both for the person who's not engaging and for the people who are trying to get them to engage, because sometimes people are not aware that they're not engaging in a way that the group wants them to be engaged. And this, again, especially in academia, I don't know if you guys have noticed this, we got a lot of introverted type people that, would love to just come in, go to their office, sit in their office, not talk to anybody, go home. Okay. I'm one of those. I know I don't look like it, but I am. Sometimes people don't know what's expected. So just having that conversation of saying, hey, we really want you to be part of this. We want you to be more engaged. What can we be doing to help you get more engaged with this? And I think that sometimes, I've done this a little bit. Sometimes it's not going to move the needle. Okay. Because sometimes it's too much water under too many bridges and people are just not going to engage. They're waiting to get their paycheck and they're out. Okay. But often they just don't know, or they don't know how to engage, or they don't feel like they're empowered. One of the first meetings I was at, about 6 months in coming to UNM, I got asked a question about what was the thing that had surprised me the most about being at UNM. And to me, I felt like there were a lot of staff in particular that didn't feel like they had any agency or any kind of, and that's a sign of not having engagement, right? If people don't feel like they have agency within their own jobs to do anything. And I think that's problematic from an employee standpoint, but that's something that could be that there's a lack of empowerment or a feeling that they're not empowered to do anything, or that they don't have any authority to do anything. So that's another thing I would say, is to say, I'm going to put you in charge of X or Y or Z. Again, academics are very clever. And if they don't want to do something, I've seen faculty who've been assigned a task and then they do it so crappily that they never get asked to do a task again. So if I wave my magic wand, being assigned a task means you're going to do it. Yes. What? I've handed out several dozen of them.
Thank you. That was very nice. I enjoyed that a lot. I learned a lot. But getting back to the Zoom comment, I have a personal thought about what's happened since the pandemic. And it's a bad thing. I think that since the pandemic, well, we all left.
Yeah.
And many people have chosen not to come back because it's easier to work from home.
Yeah.
And
God, didn't see
that
the
may be
traffic
okay
lately.
for the faculty because we have our own thing. I think it's a really serious problem for graduate students.
Yeah.
And the next group of graduate students who are coming in now, it's an awful place to be. It's awful. I have people who do not know, have never met their names, who don't know half the faculty, who don't know the other students. And I've said to my department, we're doing a horrible job. We got to change this. And then I discovered that other departments are even worse.
Yes.
And if I am a graduate student coming in to interview at UNM, potentially come here, I would not want to come here.
Yeah.
Except that probably it's like this every.
Yeah,
I know some universities, I think they're having like mandatory return, I think for the staff and faculty. I don't know if I want to go that far, but I think the situation we have now is really bad. And if we get worse students next year, then we're going to lose worse students the year after that, and we're talking about a long-term.
I agree.
It's a really big university.
Yeah, 100%. And I think there are some things that that I think that individuals can do that might help make a difference. And that could include things like if you have group meetings with your, if you have grad students and you have a group meeting with your grad students, invite one of your colleagues to come to that, and maybe a colleague that's on some of your students' committees. Okay, so if you engage individuals, often that makes the difference, right? Because in general, like even if somebody's like, oh yeah, I'm not coming into campus because I can work from home or whatever. But if you say, hey, I'm having a group meeting, I would like for you to present on your latest results and blah, blah, blah. I don't know too many people who turn down invitations to talk about themselves or their work, right? No, we're not doing it by Zoom. We don't have a Zoom connection. We're meeting in person. That's the point.
think
That's the
I think
point.
that's a good ground upward.
Yeah.
But I think you as the boss, you got, I mean, something's got to change. I think it's a real big problem.
Yeah,
I have no idea.
I'm not real big on top down. So just by the way, okay. But yeah, no, I do. And I think it is a problem that we need to be probably talking about.
You're upgrading.
Absolutely.
So.
Well, actually, wait,
Oh,
real quick,
wait.
I hate to interrupt, but in the interest of respecting everyone's time,
There we go.
I do think, let me have the
There
stick.
you go.
In the interest of respecting everyone's time, I'd like to, let's thank Ellen Fisher again, but we also have some refreshments out here that, so please, we can continue the conversation.
And,
Thank
and by the way, magic wands are for, if you could take a magic wand, how would the world be in 5 years? Okay, and or what would be the ideal? So think about that, a magic wand, right? Okay.
Thank you very much, Ellen.